Before I start this video, I want to first apologize the fact that there hasn't been a lot of videos that have been uploaded to my channel. In fact, there's actually been one recording that I've done this week, and that was the review of the simulated match on MLS Match Week number 10. And yesterday's video, when I did the pack opening, I didn't record it yesterday. That was actually a week ago, and it was a pre-recording, and I actually have not even done the pre-recording for part number 3 of the pack opening. And the reason why I haven't done a lot of video is because it's that time of the year again where usually when we get into the beginning of May, and as a college student myself, you will know that this is a time where finals starts to begin. And just because we cannot go to school anymore because of this whole pandemic and, all the in-class section is over, doesn't mean that the finals exams session and all the final exam that we have to do is canceled. All of them are going to be online, and for me, luckily, most of my final exam is not online, and that it's just kind of like group project. But that also doesn't mean the fact that I am going to be free for most of this time, as most of those group project I have to kind of coordinate with group. And if you ever had experience with working in groups in college, you will know that it's kind of a little bit of a pain in the ass, but it is what it is, and we just kind of have to get over with. And the only thing I will also say is that at least I get to work with those group until the end of the semester, and they will basically be out of my life at the end of that. But that being said, let us now get into today's video, where I am going to be talking about something that is probably the most talked about right now, not only around MLS, but pretty much in every single sports league that you know of, and that is when exactly each sports league is going to return and what exactly their timeline is going to be. And as I said, throughout these last couple of weeks, I have heard multiple reports of how each league decided to approach. We also have some leagues that are started to come back. I know the Bundesliga will come back next weekend, which I believe that's the first European soccer league that is coming back. I know NASCAR is also coming back in a couple of weeks, and there's also talk that MLB might be coming back in July, and the same goes with the NHL and NBA. Now, in terms of MLS, they haven't really gave us a possible date of when they are going to come back, but they kind of give us a little bit hint in terms of how each timeline is, and there's just multiple scenarios of how the timeline is going to be and what exactly is going to be the progress of them returning to the regular season. But this is just kind of one possible timeline that I put here on the board that I think this is going to be the way how it goes. And you notice most of these are something that is similar to any of those articles that you read about. In fact, most of the bullet points that I've took off of was actually from an ESPN article that I read yesterday, where they talk about how MLS is going to approach their timeline in terms of at this stage where we are just kind of having players going back to do individual training to actually have a game that is happening and the regular season return. So, as I mentioned, the current situation right now is that MLS allow players back to team facility to do individual training, although not all of the teams have done this. I believe only 6 teams in MLS have done this, and I think a couple of them are like Atlanta United, Inter Miami, and Orlando City are some of those teams that are going to, or are teams that is currently doing that. And I also heard TFC might be another team that is thinking about doing the same thing, where they're doing kind of like a voluntary training where each of their players can now individually train in their training facility. But not all teams have done this, and eventually I think all teams are going to do this, although most of these teams that haven't done, they're going to have to kind of talk about how are they going to approach it and what are their plans in terms of following the current situation where the league only let players to train in the team's facility, but they have to train alone, and that they can't do like small groups training whatsoever. Now, speaking of training, the training moratorium that MLS has right now, the deadline is at May 15, which is only 5 days from now, and I'm not quite sure if it's going to extend it. Like, depending on what exactly MLS is trying to, what exactly is the meaning of training moratorium? Is it the fact that if players can return to train at the team's facility individually, then maybe that is kind of a definition of just not a training moratorium, and therefore that's why MLS is going to lift it a training moratorium. I mean, I always thought that when they meant MLS training moratorium means that each of these players and each of these teams cannot have like a small group or a full training session that is going to be happening. But it'll be interesting to see whether or not if that is going to extend it, or the fact that it's going to be lifted because now we have players that is training in the team's facility and they're doing individual training right now. Now, currently MLS, in terms of their season suspension deadline, is at June 8th, but I wrote most likely that's going to be extended. Like, it will be crazy, the fact that MLS decided to return after June 8th, especially we are just in pretty much phase number 1 of what would be a couple more phases before we actually get to competitive game that is going to happen again, and there is just no way in the world we can go from phase 1 to whatever phase that is when competitive game does return, and we can do that in a span of 2 weeks. So I don't think June 8th will be a time when games is going to return, and that I expect that is going to be extended possibly until the beginning of July. Now, the next step in terms of the current phase that we are on, which is players can now go back to their team facility to do individual training, is possibly small group training. And I kind of take this off of what Tab Ramos says last week when he talked about how the Dynamo is going to kind of transition into these number of phases before they get back to the full group training, and then he says that there's possibly going to be small group training after this next phase. And I really like that idea where after, if the league feel like it is safe enough where each team can do like small group training, then they can of course do that and move into the next phase. But as I said, that probably is the most likeliest phase that we are heading in, and we don't know exactly when that is going to happen. Now, the league have also continued to hold online meeting with individual ownership group, stakeholder, and soccer operation, and all those people that involve with individual team and also the league itself. And this is just for them to kind of continue to communicate what are their possible plans for the season to return, and also the each phase that we are going to go into to pretty much the road of this season resuming possibly in late summer or maybe in the beginning of fall. But each they kind of have like a discussion, and hopefully with all these discussion they eventually will figure out a official timeline of how they are going to approach it. Now, before the seasons resume, they're gonna have to at least be a couple of scrimmage and friendly each team will have, and I'm assuming we're gonna have kind of like a second off season. And I think this was mentioned by Luchi Gonzalez a couple of months back, where he talked about how MLS should have a second preseason, because you don't expect each of these players that haven't seen a competitive match in almost 3 or 4 months, or whenever, if the league is going to come back, and expect them to just go back on to the pitch and start playing competitive match again. That is just very unrealistic, and I'm pretty sure the players are not going to like that. So therefore, I think the league's going to have games that is going to be kind of like a preseason friendly, although in this case it's not really a preseason friendly. It's more like we need to kind of get back into fitness and get back into kind of competitive game level fitness before we can actually have competitive match, and these friendly and scrimmage will definitely help. Now, I don't know how exactly these friendlies and scrimmage is going to look like. Are they going to do like a tournament style, or are they just going to have like games where there's going to be like a first team kind of squad face against a reserve team, or if teams are going to do what they did in the preseason, which is face against each other in a kind of little mini tournament somewhere in a single venue. We don't know how that's going to go, so that's going to be determined, but I'm assuming there's going to have to at least be some scrimmage and friendly each team will have before the season restarts. Now, speaking of the season restarting, now this is where it's going to be kind of tricky to talk about because, as I said before, there are multiple ways of how this season could look like once we return to play, and that is something that is going to be worthy of me doing another video to talk about because there's just a ton of different options that they have and tons of way that the league can use as a format to restart the regular season. And as I said, I'll probably talk about that in a separate video, but in this video I'll just talk about one kind of type of format that they potentially would do, and this is something that has been talked about in multiple articles, including the one that I read yesterday on ESPN, and that is the season could restart with a tournament style, with each tournament to be played in one or multiple location. Now, this is very similar to the MLB format, where I know in MLB they are talking about how there's going to be 3 different division, and these 3 division, each of these teams are going to be in this division depending on the geographical alignment, and they will, of course, would be play against each other in this one or multiple specific venue, and whoever is going to finish like in the top half, or maybe depending on how many teams they want to make it to the playoffs from each division, they of course will make it to the playoffs. Now, I'm not saying MLS is potentially going to do something similar to that, but hey, why not? I mean, that could be a good idea considering, MLS, they definitely want to not only think about the season that is going to restart, but they also want to limit in terms of the travel. Like, the last thing each team want to do right now is have to travel all the way across the other side of the country in a pandemic that is still pretty strong, and that there's still a lot of fear in terms of traveling right now. So I feel like the league will think about choosing a couple of location or just multiple location that is close to each other, and now you will put specific amount of team in that location and specific team in that location, and they of course will be playing each other in that specific location, and that they don't have to worry about travel to another city, or if they do have to travel to another city, it might not actually be very far where they have to like fly all the way across the other side of the country. And also, these games, there won't be any fans attending these games. I'm assuming it's going to be a closed door kind of tournament style. Like, I would be surprised if they decided to have fans in these games, because when we decided to restart the season, I'm pretty sure every single league in the world have agreed that they are not going to just immediately invite fans back into the game, and potentially these kind of situation would be worse than the pandemic that we are in right now. So that's why I think we're probably going to have no fans that is going to be in these games, but that's okay, because if you play these kind of tournament style, and that each of these teams are kind of playing a neutral venue, it's kind of hard to really attract any fans if you're playing in a neutral venue, either way. So yeah, I think it's going to be kind of a closed door kind of tournament where each of these teams will have to play behind closed door, and we'll see what happens once the tournament ends. Now, once the tournament does end, there's also a option of whether or not if we're just going to move right into the playoffs, or we're going to just continue the regular season, and that the tournament is just going to be part of the regular season, and for the other part of the regular season and near the end of it, this is when each of these teams can return to play at their home stadium with limited or no fans attending the game. And I'm assuming this usually will happen maybe near the end of fall, and probably around November and December, when they could decide that teams can return to their home stadium. But again, we don't know whether or not if fans are going to be allowed to it, and if there is going to be fans allowed to these games, I'm assuming it's not going to be like when were we were in a situation before this pandemic where you can basically allow everybody to go to the games. We're going to have limited capacity, and the limited capacity, I don't know how that's going to work. Are they going to have like season ticket holder as a priority of going to these games, and then so on and so forth? But we shall see if that is going to be the case, where they're going to be having limited fans attending the game, or they're not even going to have fans attending the games as part of the second part of the regular season, where teams can return to play at their home stadium. Now, MLS Cup could be played during January and February in a warm weather neutral venue, and this has kind of been discussed before, where most likely MLS Cup this year, for the first time since 2011, it will be played in a neutral venue, and most likely it's going to be played in a warm weather neutral venue, because you cannot play an MLS Cup in Toronto or in New York. Like, that is just insane if you think that is going to work. So most likely it's going to be a warm weather neutral venue, and there's even a question whether or not if there's going to be any fans attending those games too. And also, talking about MLS Cup, the playoffs, that is going to be interesting to see whether or not is that going to be played in a warm weather neutral venue, and that the playoffs is going to be similar to what we saw when the season potentially resumed, where it's going to have a tournament style, and each of these tournaments will be played in a specific location, and that's the way it's going to go. Because again, if the playoffs is going to happen this season, and let's assume MLS Cup is going to happen in January and February, that means you're going to be playing in the playoffs during December and January, and during those months you just cannot play games in these cities that is just incredibly cold during the winter, and that you're just going to have to once again play those games in a warm weather neutral venue instead of a team home ground during those playoffs. So we shall see whether or not if that's going to be the case, as well as what the 2020 MLS Cup is going to look like. And because MLS Cup is going to conclude potentially in January or February, that means the season is going to start late next year, and that I think there's going to be at least 2 or 3 months of a downtime for each MLS team to kind of like regroup. Now, the good thing about MLS is that unlike any other league where you're going to have to at least have 2 to 3 months of just off season, because you have to have like the trades go off season trade and the free agency kind of stuff, and also you're going to have like a draft during those points. The beauty of MLS is that they can actually just skip through all that process, and that I think we talk about how the super draft is being one of the most useless thing, and it's kind of started to be outdated, and that I feel like in the upcoming years that is going to be a thing that is going to eliminate. Well, it's not going to be the upcoming years that it's going to be eliminated, but this heading into this next off season, this could be actually the death of the super draft, because I'm assuming with just a limited off season, I don't think MLS is going to be thinking about doing like a super draft, and especially knowing the super draft are usually players that is coming out of college, and you don't know heading into this college soccer season, you don't know whether or not if they're actually going to play, even though college soccer doesn't happen until September. And since we had that whole discussion about, well, we didn't have this discussion, but we have just recently heard about the development academy no longer exists. Is college soccer going to be the next thing that is going to be abolished? And if college soccer is going to be abolished, then I don't see why in the world would you actually have a super draft anymore, because the super draft, most of the players that gets drafted in the super draft are coming out of college, and if you don't have players that is coming out of college, there's really no point of actually doing a super draft. But either way, I think this season, knowing what has happened in terms of how this pandemic has really changed so many kind of ways of how this season is going to go. Maybe this might be the year where the super draft is not going to be a thing, and that it's just going to be a shortened off season, and teams will just continue to do deal as they head into the preseason and head into the regular season, and that is going to be the way it's going to go. There will also be testing in pre and post game for each player's coaching staff and referees. I mean, this kind of makes sense. I mean, each game, I think players going to have to do a testing to see whether or not if they actually have the virus, and if they do, they are not allowed to play in the game. And during the post game part, I think they're going to do it again, because in case if they didn't detect it during the pre game testing, they might able to detect it in the post game testing. And yeah, that of course is going to be the way to go. The question about the testing is that what's going to happen with the testing outside of competitive match? Like, there's really not a lot of ideas of how testing is going to imply when each team is not playing a competitive match. Is there going to be testing in each training session that each team is going to do? And if that is going to be the case, then you better make sure those testing has to be quick, because from what I heard, testing right now it's been kind of a little bit limited right now, and it is getting a little bit better, and you are started to kind of find the resort, not like in a couple of days, like a couple of months ago when testing was a real problem here in the US and they couldn't figure out how to do it properly. So we'll see whether if that is going to be the case, and if they're going to have testing during each training session or anything that is unrelated to training session or off-field situation, how is that going to look like? That is going to be something that is still going to be determined. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it. Kind of my spiel in terms of the possible timeline of how the season is going to return. And I also talked about some bonus kind of things like testing, and also what the league is doing right now to trying to get the season restarted. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this? Again, there's just multiple kind of ways that the season can restart it. This is just kind of my assumption of how it's going to go. It's not necessarily going to be the way how it's going to go, but either way, as I said many times before, let's just hope eventually things are going to get better, and that the times when we hope to see some MLS soccer action is going to be closer than we think. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.